everybody, welcome back. It's Victoria again. For those of you who don't know me, I am the editor-in-chief of American English Texts at Content Team. So we've been asked some questions about writing IT texts lately, and this is a path that as a company we have recently just really dived into, so I wanted to share with you some insight on writing technical texts for a North American audience. My first tip, KISS, K-I-S-S. You might know it stands for Keep It Simple, Stupid. Keep it simple, stupid. Right? Sounds a little silly. Essentially what it means is to keep your words and sentences in your technical text as simple as possible. The last thing that you want to do is frustrate the reader by being overly wordy, especially if the technical topic itself is already frustrating. Right? So if they don't have that background knowledge on the topic and they're trying to learn about it, and then suddenly you're throwing like complex sentence structures and multi-syllabic words at them, they're going to try to find a different guide, I promise you. So I'm going to give you, I wrote down a bad example and a good example of being a little too wordy. Okay, the bad one. Subsequent, I'm going to put on my fancy voice for this. Okay, just bear with me. Subsequent to the passage of the subject legislation, it is incumbent upon you to advise your organization to comply with it. What? What did I say? Okay, so that's bad. That's way too wordy. They're going to get to the end of the sentence and then start over and read it again, and then probably start over and read it one more time. And that's not what you want. After that happens a couple of times, they're going to look for a technical text that's written by someone else. Okay, so here is the good way to do that sentence. After the law passes, you must tell your people to comply with it. It's the exact same thing. I'm going to do it one more time. Subsequent to the passage of the subject legislation, it is incumbent upon you to advise your organization to comply with it. After the law passes, you must tell your people to comply with it. Right? So what you want to do is look at a sentence and see if there's any way possible to make it simpler than it already is. And this is going to really take some practice, and it helps if you bring in an outside eye and just have them circle or mark any sentence that seems kind of iffy to them, and then you can work on reducing that. Okay, my next tip is to avoid technical jargon as much as possible, especially if you're writing technical text for non-IT workers. So the goal here is to make your text accessible to the lowest common denominator. And not only that, the IT world changes so quickly, right? It's never constant, and you don't want to incorporate trendy buzzwords. Otherwise, your text is going to seem outdated in a couple of years when nobody's really using those terms anymore. But this isn't to say that jargon doesn't have a proper time and place. Essentially, there are two main contexts for using jargon, okay? The first one, it's not the good way to use it. It's when you're using it as an exclusionary mechanism to keep non-members in the dark and confused, right? It's rude. It's like you don't want them to understand, and it comes across as very condescending in writing. But the other context is when you are writing a text that's for in-the-know people. And in that case, it's easier to use industry terms. So I would suggest to assess the audience of your writing and use your best judgment. All right, so my third tip, this is really important when writing for an American audience, okay? When you're composing a list of do's and don'ts, which I've noticed is very common in IT documents, include the reasoning behind it. Don't just say, do this, do this, do this, don't do this, don't do this, right? Tell the consequences or say why they need to do it a certain way. And the do's and don'ts might seem like common sense to you, but an American audience is really going to want to know the logic and the rationale behind the rules. And along a similar vein, try to include real case studies whenever you can. Instead of giving a hypothetical scenario to prove a point, take the time to find an actual example. And when it comes to creating technical texts for an American audience, those statistics and case studies are going to be your best friend. Like, let's say you are writing an article about cloud security tips. Rather than making up an imaginary scenario about a cloud hack, maybe include real instances where well-known companies like Dropbox and Microsoft experienced cloud hacking. And that's going to have so much more of an impact on your readers when they can see that that's backed up by a real-world situation. And I'm almost done, I promise. As a closing note, you don't have to have every single technical writer on your team be American in order to write for an American English audience. Assigning an American technical editor for your writing team should be sufficient. And if you have any questions regarding IT writing that I haven't addressed today, just leave a comment and I will get to it next time. All right, guys, catch you later.